They laughed the moment she spoke. 5 powerful men in tailored suits, a glass-walled boardroom above Manhattan, and a young woman in jeans calmly saying she owned everything they thought was theirs. They assumed it was a joke, a mistake, maybe a prank gone too far. But when the signature at the bottom of the document was revealed, the laughter died instantly. What none of them knew was that this moment had begun 15 years earlier, on a rainy street with a flat tire, an umbrella, and a choice so small it seemed meaningless at the time, until it quietly rewrote an entire empire. The glass walls of the boardroom rose like a crown above Manhattan, sunlight slicing through them and scattering across polished steel and dark walnut. From the 42nd floor, the city looked obedient. Tiny cars, silent people, everything neatly reduced to motion and profit. Emily Carter felt none of that power. She stood alone at the far end of the table, fingers curled lightly around a thin leather folder, her heart beat loud enough to drown out the hum of the building. She wore jeans, simple flats, a plain white t-shirt under a dark blazer she'd bought on clearance 3 years ago. Her brown hair was pulled into a low ponytail, neat but unremarkable. Across from her sat 5 men who had never once needed to wonder whether they belonged in a room. They leaned back in their chairs, tailored suits crisp, watches heavy with money and legacy. Coffee steamed beside legal pads filled with numbers that decided other people's lives. At the head of the table sat Richard Hale. He didn't look at Emily at first. He was scrolling through his phone, thumb moving lazily, mouth curved in the faintest smile, the kind that came from always expecting to win. Emily took a breath. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest, "I believe this meeting is about ownership. I'm here because I'm the new owner of Harrington Manufacturing Group." Silence lasted exactly half a second. Then the room exploded. Laughter hit the glass walls and bounced back, louder, sharper. One man slapped the table. Another shook his head like he'd just witnessed an impressive joke. Richard finally looked up, eyes flicking over Emily from head to toe, lingering just long enough to dismiss her. The smile widened. "Kid," he said, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye, "you've got confidence, I'll give you that. But this isn't a college prank. This is a $12 billion company." More laughter. Emily didn't move. She stepped forward and placed the folder on the table, sliding it smoothly until it stopped in front of Richard. "Please," she said, "just read it." Richard sighed theatrically, picked up the folder with 2 fingers, already shaking his head. He opened it, eyes scanning the first page with practiced boredom. Then he froze. The room began to quiet, not because anyone understood what was happening, but because they sensed it. Richard's smirk vanished. His posture stiffened. He flipped to the last page. The signature stared back at him. Bold, looping, familiar. William Harrington. Richard's fingers tightened around the paper. "No," he whispered. Emily watched his face drain of color, watched the power shift in real time. And as the room fell into stunned silence, her mind drifted, not to victory, not to revenge, but to reign. 15 years earlier. Evanston, Illinois, didn't look like much that afternoon. Gray skies pressed low over cracked sidewalks and tired storefronts. Rain fell hard and cold, soaking through everything it touched. Emily was 16 then, rushing home from school, her backpack heavy with textbooks, and her head full of plans she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to afford. College felt like a dream reserved for other people. Kids with parents who didn't work double shifts, who didn't count every dollar twice. She spotted the car first, a classic Cadillac DeVille, deep blue, parked awkwardly on the side of the road. An older man stood beside it, coat already soaked, hands trembling as he struggled with a jack that clearly wasn't cooperating. Cars passed without slowing. Emily hesitated. She was late. Her shoes were already wet, and she didn't know him. But she crossed the street anyway. "Sir?" she called out, lifting her umbrella to shield them both. "Do you need help?" The man turned, irritation etched into every line of his face. "I've got it," he snapped. "Just damn thing won't—" His voice broke when his hand slipped. Pain flashed across his expression. Emily didn't argue. She knelt in the puddle beside him, set her umbrella so it covered them both, and reached for the jack. "My dad taught me," she said with a small smile. "He said cars don't care how old you are." The man, William Harrington, stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. He wasn't used to help. Not like this. Not without a price. Emily worked quickly, chatting as she went. About school, about her mom's night shifts at the hospital, about how she volunteered at a shelter on weekends, teaching kids how to fix bikes and broken radios. "Kindness is free," she said lightly, tightening the last bolt. "That's why my family gives it away." When the tire was done, William reached for his wallet. Emily shook her head immediately. "No, thank you." He paused. "Then what do you want?" She pulled a soggy index card from her pocket, scribbled her name on it, and drew a small sun in the corner. "Just pay it forward." William watched her run off into the rain, backpack bouncing, umbrella tilted against the wind. He never forgot her. Years passed. Richard Hale climbed fast at Harrington Manufacturing Group. He was brilliant, ruthless, efficient. He cut costs by cutting people, laid off hundreds without hesitation. Shareholders loved him. Employees feared him. From his office, William watched it all, and he remembered a girl in the rain. Quietly, he began to investigate. Emily Carter had worked 2 jobs through community college. She'd turned down offers that felt wrong, chosen work that mattered instead. By 30, she'd founded Carter Community Works, a nonprofit training underprivileged teens in skilled trades: auto repair, welding, electrical work. She never used his name, never asked for help. When William's health failed, he rewrote everything. The fortune went to charities. The company went to Emily, because she had seen him not as a billionaire, but as a man stuck in the rain. Back in the boardroom, the silence stretched. Emily stood tall. "I didn't ask for this," she said softly, "but Mr. Harrington believed leadership should have a heart. I intend to honor that." "Shudrum." Richard stared at her, world unraveling. And the city outside kept moving, unaware that everything inside that room had just changed. The silence in the boardroom didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, like ice under too much weight. One executive cleared his throat. Another shifted in his chair, leather creaking, eyes darting between Emily and Richard, as if waiting for someone to laugh again and reset reality. No one did. Richard Hale was still staring at the signature. He had seen it 1,000 times, on contracts worth more than most cities' annual budgets, on acquisitions that swallowed competitors whole, on documents that made men like him powerful simply by proximity. William Harrington's signature had built his career, and now it was dismantling it. This has to be contested," Richard said at last, his voice thin, controlled too tightly. "Wills get challenged all the time. You don't just walk in here and—" Emily met his gaze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "It's already been reviewed," she said. 3 independent law firms, federal and state. Everything is valid." She paused, then added quietly, "You've had copies for 6 minutes." Richard's eyes flicked to his tablet. The unread notification glared back at him. The room shifted again. Not laughter now, calculation. The men around the table leaned forward, studying Emily as if she'd suddenly changed shape. She hadn't. Same jeans, same steady posture. But something invisible had settled around her, something heavier than authority. Legitimacy. "Why you?" one of them finally asked. Not hostile, not kind, just blunt. "There are people in this room who've given decades to this company." Emily nodded. "I know." Her mind flickered back to a cramped community center with peeling paint and donated chairs, to nights spent balancing spreadsheets while listening to kids argue over whose turn it was to use the only working laptop. "I didn't give decades," she continued. "I gave intention." Richard scoffed before he could stop himself. "Intention doesn't run a global manufacturing empire." "No," Emily said. "People do." That landed harder than she expected. A few executives looked down. One man near the window folded his hands slowly, as if considering something he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. Emily took a breath and sat. She didn't sit at the head of the table. Not yet. "I'm not here to fire anyone today," she said. "I'm here to listen, and then we'll begin fixing what's been breaking quietly for a long time." Richard laughed again, but this time it came out sharp, defensive. "You mean profits?" he said. "Margins?" "I mean morale," Emily replied. "Turnover. Communities we strip resources from and never rebuilt. People who gave their loyalty and were treated as line items." She turned to him fully now. "Including your own staff." Richard stood abruptly, chair scraping back. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You want to play savior? Fine, but you're not cutting me out." "I'm not," Emily said. That stopped him. She reached into her folder and slid one more document across the table. "This is my first decision as owner," she said. "It's an offer." Richard hesitated, then grabbed the paper. His eyes moved quickly, then slower. A severance package generous enough to silence headlines. Funding for a smaller venture. No lawsuits, no public humiliation. An exit with dignity. The room watched him like a jury. "You're letting me walk," he said. "Yes." "After everything?" Emily met his eyes. "Because I don't believe in revenge. And because Mr. Harrington didn't either." Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. Then it was gone, buried under habit. He folded the paper once. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Emily said, "but it's mine." He left without another word. The doors closed behind him with a soft, final sound. No one spoke. Emily exhaled slowly. In the weeks that followed, the company changed in ways no quarterly report could fully explain. Layoffs were paused, then reversed. Departments were rebuilt with people who had been quietly pushed out for asking difficult questions. Training programs expanded. Factories partnered with local schools. Carter Community Works merged into the company not as a charity arm, but as a pipeline for talent that had been overlooked for decades. At first, Wall Street panicked. Then productivity rose, not because people were afraid to lose their jobs, but because they wanted to keep them. Emily walked factory floors instead of hiding behind assistants. She learned names. She listened to complaints that had nowhere else to go. She made mistakes. She admitted them. And slowly, trust replaced fear. Richard watched from a distance. His new venture was smaller, quieter. For the first time in his life, success didn't come easily. Employees didn't jump when he spoke. They questioned him, challenged him. It infuriated him. Then one afternoon, his car stalled on a rain-soaked road outside the city. He stood there, frustrated, suit already damp, watching other cars pass. For a long moment, no one stopped. Then a young man pulled over. Hoodie soaked, shoes muddy. "You okay?" he asked. Richard hesitated. Pride rose instinctively, and then, unexpectedly, he lowered it. "Yeah," he said. "I could use a hand." As the rain fell, something inside him shifted. Just a little. Back at Harrington Manufacturing Group, Emily stood alone in the boardroom one evening, the city glowing beyond the glass. She placed the soggy index card she'd kept all these years on the table. The sun was faded now, but it was still there. The rain came back the night Emily finally understood the full weight of what she'd inherited. Not the kind that storms and shouts, but the quiet, steady kind that turns city lights into long reflections and makes even Manhattan feel briefly human. She stood by the glass wall of her office long after everyone had gone home, watching the streets below, thinking about how strange it was that her life kept circling back to moments like this. Rain, stillness, choice. Harrington Manufacturing Group was no longer bleeding talent. The headlines had shifted from skepticism to curiosity, then to something close to admiration. Analysts struggled to explain why a company that refused mass layoffs and poured money into training programs was outperforming competitors who cut faster and harder. Emily knew the answer. People didn't need fear to work hard. They needed dignity. Still, doubt visited her often. Late at night, when the boardroom was empty and the city felt impossibly large, she wondered whether she was doing enough, whether William Harrington had been wrong, whether one act of kindness could really hold up under the weight of an empire. That doubt followed her into the email she opened that evening. It was from a factory supervisor in Ohio. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." The message was longer. He wrote about a worker named Luis who had been laid off 3 years earlier after an injury slowed him down. About how Luis had been rehired, retrained through the new program, and was now supervising safety compliance. About how accidents had dropped. about how Luis's daughter had just been accepted into college. At the bottom, one line stood out. "You didn't just give him a job back, you gave him his pride." Emily closed her laptop and let herself breathe. Across the city, in a modest office above a quiet street, Richard Hale stared at his own reflection in a darkened window. His new company was surviving, not soaring, and for the first time in his career, that didn't feel like failure. He thought often about the boardroom, about Emily's voice when she said, "Maybe this mistake is mine," about how she'd given him an exit when she could have destroyed him. He hadn't said thank you. Pride had sealed his mouth shut. That night, he typed an email he never sent, then another, then finally one line he couldn't delete. "You were right about people." He saved it as a draft and shut down his computer. The real test came 6 months later. A global supplier scandal broke without warning. A partner overseas was exposed for exploiting labor. The kind of story that destroyed reputations overnight. Investors panicked. Phones rang nonstop. Advisors urged Emily to distance the company immediately, to deny knowledge, to protect the brand at all costs. Emily read every report herself. Then she called an emergency meeting. When the cameras were set up and the press filled the room, she didn't hide behind statements written by lawyers. She stood alone at the podium, shoulders squared, voice calm. "We failed to see what we should have seen," she said, "and that failure matters." Gasps rippled through the room. "We are ending the partnership effective immediately. We are funding independent investigations, and we are committing resources to repair the harm done." A reporter raised his hand. "This will cost your company millions." "Yes," Emily replied, "and pretending it didn't happen would cost us more." The story exploded across media, and then something unexpected happened. Employees stood by her. Customers stayed. Communities listened. The stock dipped, then recovered, slowly, honestly. That night, Emily returned to the boardroom alone. She placed the old index card on the table again. The sun was barely visible now, ink bleeding into the paper. She smiled. William Harrington had once written that leadership without humanity was just control wearing a suit. She finally understood what he meant. A year later, the company held its annual gathering not in a luxury hotel, but in a renovated factory space, now filled with light, plants, and people who laughed easily. Workers stood beside executives, apprentices beside managers. Emily watched from the edge of the room as a group of young trainees crowded around a mentor, arguing good-naturedly about a design idea. She felt something loosen in her chest. Richard arrived late. No one announced him. No one stopped him. He stood quietly, hands clasped, observing a world he once ruled and now barely recognized. When Emily noticed him, surprise flickered across her face. He walked over slowly. "I owe you something," he said. Emily waited. "An apology," he continued, "and a thank you." She nodded once. "Accepted." They stood there for a moment, not as enemies, not as allies, but as two people who had learned something expensive. As the evening wound down, rain began to fall again outside. Soft, familiar. Emily stepped out onto the terrace, letting a few drops hit her face. She thought about a 16-year-old girl with wet sneakers and an umbrella tilted against the wind, about how she hadn't known she was changing anything that day, only helping. The city hummed behind her. The future felt uncertain, imperfect, alive, and for the first time she felt completely at peace with that. Now that the story has come to its end, I want to ask you honestly how it made you feel. Do you believe kindness can really survive in a world driven by money and power? Yes or no? Did Emily's choices inspire you or make you question what leadership should look like? If this story touched you, please comment 100 below so I know you stayed with it until the end. Tell me which country you're watching from, and if you think this story is worth sharing, send it to someone who might need this reminder today.